Oh, well, we're here to talk about your album, To What
Mm,
Listens. I'm Kurt Hauswirth with Public Radio 90, and it's exciting to have you both here today. I'm here with the composer Libby Meyer and violinist Scott Flavin. And as we've been discussing, we're in some very different weather conditions. Scott, you're down in the Florida area, and Libby, you're up in the Keweenaw. So those are kind of polar opposites right now. But I'm glad that we have the use of technology to bring us together today to discuss your album and to discuss the performances on it. So we're talking about To What Listens, which is out now on Albany Records, and it has works that are inspired by natural surroundings and features performances with some familiar names, not just Scott here, but we also have Pat Booth on saxophone, Mike Christensen on trombone, just to name a few other people involved with the album. So I'm going to welcome both of you here. Libby, good to have you on the chat today.
Great, thank you.
And Scott, glad that you could join us from down in the Florida area as well.
Yeah, it's chilly today. It's 79 this morning.
Oh no, humble brag with the weather.
Oh my God.
But it will come up. So, but speaking of natural surroundings and the weather, the album features, some stunning works that have to do with natural surroundings, works for chamber groups involving with vocal ensemble performances, some solo instrumentation as well. So Libby, is nature the prime influence for you with your compositions? Or does that also partner with who is available to perform these works too?
Well, who's available is always kind of a thing. I tend to like to write for people. So usually if I'm writing something, it's because I'm writing for someone I have in mind. Although this piece was not written for Scott. This was written for another violinist. Corey Summers was her name. She was, that's an old piece. It's about 20 years old. And Scott, you knew Corey, right?
Yes.
I think you did. Yeah. So yeah, she's a violinist down in Kalamazoo, a great violinist. But I don't set out to write music about the natural world. It just happens to be what inspires me. So I'm really just, I'm fascinated by sound in general. And so, I have a cabin out in the back 40 and I hear a lot of bird songs and read a lot of poetry. And so those are the things that inspire me. I get kind of labeled as sort of a nature composer. And I guess I'll take it. But yeah, it's kind of funny. But yeah, it's like I said, I think it's just what I'm curious about or what I'm interested in. And so the last couple of years, it has been like birdsong. There's a piece on the album about a horse that I ride. That Baroque dances Baroque is the name of a horse, actually. And and he dances, and so that's where the title of that piece came from. And then I thought it would be kind of clever to put in like some Bach that I liked. But yeah, I guess I'll take the label, and yeah, it does inspire a lot of what I do, but it's not like I have to write that way. That's just
Right.
Sort of, I guess, what inspires me.
Yeah, it's not in a set of rules or anything that you might.
No, I don't have a rule list.
Good to hear that it's more, organic process for you than, something like that. But that being said, it's a wonderful album that, gives us reminders to pay attention to nature, to maybe listen more deeply to our surroundings, especially if we're in more electronic confines a lot of the time or indoors. Yeah. So always good to have those reminders and to have the music be fresh and full of that life. Talking about your collaborators a bit, names familiar to people from the Upper Great Lakes region, Pat Booth, Mike Christensen, Scott, who's joined us today as well. You mentioned in the acknowledgments of the album, this is kind of the elephant in the room, that COVID happened.
Yeah.
So, that's a layer of challenges. How did that work out for the recording process to round up these recordings for these musicians, throughout this challenging time?
Yeah, it was fun. I'll make a really long, I'll make a really long story really short. So I got funding. Actually, I'm going to back up even further. So there's a friend of mine who I have to bring up. Her name is Elena Brewer, and she grew up in the UP. She's a composer now. She teaches at MIT. She's extremely successful, and she's been just an amazing mentor and wonderful person all around. And a couple years ago, I was looking at recording a piece of mine, and she said, "Well, why don't you just do a whole album?" And I was like, "Oh, I can do that." And so, and this is like 2000, whatever, pre-COVID. And so I was fortunate to get funding. We have some internal grants here at Michigan Tech, and so I got some funding. And then she lined up everything. So she lined up, at that time, I used Capella Clausura, which is a really wonderful professional choir in Boston. She lined up WGBH Studios for me, which was amazing, working with Antonio Oliveri, who was the recording engineer, who is, Scott, you can agree with me on this one. Antonio was amazing and has some amazing ears, which is always great for a recording engineer. But anyways, and you know, found musicians for me in Boston, and it was wonderful. So we did the recording in 2000, whatever that is, before COVID. And then we were going to mix it down. I was going to finish the rest of the CD, and then COVID happened. And so everything just shut down. So the CD was supposed to come out like almost 2 years ago. So that everything shut down, and I was going to record a quartet. And I was going to do that here at Michigan Tech. And then I got some more funding and was able to actually hire another quartet in Boston. And then at the last minute thought, oh, I've got this violin piece that I love that's really old. I know this really awesome violinist. And I texted Scott. I said, "Do you want to go to Boston for the weekend and record my violin piece?" And so, yeah, so it was kind of serendipitous in a way. Like I would not wish COVID again, but in a way it actually sort of helped the trajectory, allowed me time to get some more funding. And then I work with a really great a mixing engineer here at Michigan Tech, Chris Plummer, who ended up doing all the mixing work. And so that it was definitely a labor of love, and a lot of work and a lot of time. So when it finally came out, it was pretty exciting. But yeah, COVID did definitely slow the process down a lot.
Well, yeah, and it's nice to hear the silver linings, though. I mean, I've talked to a few musicians that have tried to put together projects during this really continually tumultuous time, and even though there are those struggles, it seems like people adapt and they overcome and they find ways to make things work, or they change their trajectory a bit to get to that, you know, end of the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
So glad to hear that happen for you, and that, you know, the album's here, it's out, and
Yeah.
we can enjoy it now.
Yeah.
So that's super. Well, Scott, let's go to you for a moment and talk about your work with the album here. So what was your experience working with Libby in putting this track together? Because you have a wonderful solo violin work, Melusina Calls to the Loon. And so what was it like working with Libby on putting this together?
Well, it was such a pleasure because I've known Libby for over 20 years, back when we were about 3 years old, I think. No, it's been a lot of years. And in fact, heard this piece, Corey played this piece probably 23 or so, 22 or 3 years ago, and fell in love with it and became a fan of Libby's music. And, you know, anytime a composer you believe in has the wherewithal and the time and effort to make an album, I believe in that so strongly, because it's an effort. And, you know, we focus our lives on performing music and writing music and making music, but the idea of producing something in a recording studio, it's a little bit, it's not necessarily in our area of focus. You know, we want to be creating music and not necessarily recording it, but it needs to be done, and people need to hear this music. So I'm very, very excited about this when she asked if I could play. And also, you know, we're now working together as the leadership of the Pine Mountain Music Festival, which also is amazing to see all the facets of brilliance she has and she brings. It's just remarkable. But this piece, yeah, it's very interesting. One can focus on the loon calls and the you know, connection with nature. I think a little bit like Libby feel also, however, that music can be absolute music, you know, that it exists as music. And it's a human tendency, I suppose, to put stories and to make those connections, which can be, you know, useful to welcome an audience. However, I look at that, and that certainly influences me, and the beauty of the UP, as I'm going up so many years. And of course, I was thinking about that. The thing I loved about this piece and do love about this music is there's a degree of freedom, and what I was trying to access, and with her great support, was living in the moment, you know, making some decisions, but then actually living and breathing it. And one of the performance indications in the score is for the performer to be barefoot. And that was, it seems like a little thing, but in terms of concert performance, because we did it in concert and in the studio, to feel that connection with the ground, with the world, it's a little thing, but it's actually a huge, huge thing. And it makes me want to take my shoes off and get my patent leather shoes off and feel connected with where I'm performing. The other thing that we did in the studio, and WGBH Studios is one of the great recording studios, at least in the Northeast, dimmed the lights. And I felt, it's not a long piece, so I felt it was important to attempt to do a recording with no edits, so that it was one organic thing with warts and all. And believe me, I have my warts. So that was something to strive for. And I believe we did that. The final product was one take. One other thing is I was able to borrow a very amazing violin made by Guarneri in 1714 that's worth, you know, a fortune. And something about playing a piece of wood. The wood was, I think the wood dates from about 1660. So that wood was cut down in 1660, and it's existed in this form since 1714. And I'm playing this music in a studio with wood and resonance and making sound waves from that. It's a very poignant thing, connected with the idea of living in the moment and trying to create something that lives and breathes in that moment. And I just find endless beauty and a rich palette of colors in Libby's writing. I think she's a fantastic composer. I shouldn't say that in front of her, but no, it's really,
I'm blushing.
It's a beautiful thing. So it was a wonderful experience for me.
Oh, that's so good to hear. I mean, when you go from, you know, having a product like this in your hands and, you know, reading the notes and saying, oh, this sounds interesting, that looks really cool, maybe reading some liner notes, that gives you one side of the story. But when you hear it from the performer, you hear it internalized within that moment where they put it together, and you hear how those sound waves were produced and then finally recorded. I mean, it's wonderful to hear that. It sounds like such an organic process. And again, good reminders to be present. And, you know, I've got my boots on right now and I want to take my boots and my socks off. So, you know, it just brings us back to being as authentic and human as possible, I feel. And that's kind of what I felt as I took some time to listen and kind of let it soak in to myself as well. So good to hear that testimonial to Libby's music from you, Scott, and your experience recording things. So just a reminder that we're speaking with Libby Meyer, composer, with her album To What Listens, that's out on Albany Records, and Scott Flavin is joining us. He also performed on the album, as we just talked about. Wanted to talk briefly about some of the ensembles that were involved on the record as well. You know, history shows that the voices of women in music weren't always heard, and there's obviously still work to be done there. But your ensemble or your album features this ensemble, Capella Clausura, and then Amelia Leclerc. Can you speak?
Leclerc, yeah.
Yeah, can you speak to your relationship with them and again how they got involved?
That was also Elena. So it was really neat because she. So again, I keep bringing her up, but she's been such a champion of my work and a lot of women's work. She's just been a really great mentor, not only to me, but to a number of composers. And Amelia has recorded and presented some of her work. And so she said, oh, I've got this great choir for your work. And Amelia does tend to present a lot of music of women, historical women. This is the other thing, is a lot of people think that women started writing in 1970. And, you know, there are composers, women composers from way back, right? So, and so she has done a lot of music by historical women. And so she conducted and lined up the musicians. Mike Williams is a percussionist out of Boston who's a phenomenal percussionist. So he played on several of the pieces to What Listens, and then he also played on Baroque dances, which we learned was an absolute beast. And in fact, I will say that one of the really neat things about Scott's recording Melusina, it was the only piece on the album that was recorded in one take. Everything else was many takes and many edits and a lot of panic. So it was so nice when Scott said, no, I think I just want to record it in one take. It was like, oh, that was easy. But yeah, so I went to Boston and, you know, had coffee with Amelia, and we went over the scores and set everything up. And Capella Clausura is just a phenomenal choir. Some of the voices are amazing. And it's neat because the first song, I'm trying to remember. Johnny. Yeah. No, for Johnny B. The first song on To What Listens actually is the one about the wren, and it's got a whistle. There's a whistler at the beginning, and she said, "Oh, this is great because one of our singers is a whistler," which I don't know if you know this, but that's not that common. And they're a really good whistler. Like they started whistling the melody, and I went, "Oh, like that's a thing." So that was very fortunate, I think. But then it was funny because I was going to have a quartet that I work with here record it, and then it just didn't work out. And so I also worked with members of Juventus, which is a contemporary music ensemble in Boston, they actually just did they just did a piece of mine, and they're doing another piece of mine in June. But they've been really good about championing works of, you know, underrepresented composers and kind of mid-career composers. And so I contacted my friend Oliver, who lives in Boston. I set up that quartet, and he said, great, I've got musicians. So I had them record it, and they did a fantastic job with it. One of the pieces, Turbulence, was actually written when I was in Alaska. And it was originally written for a different ensemble, and it kind of translated to string trio, but it was really hard, really up there for the viola. So that it was just nice to work with those musicians. It was just a really great, kind of the perfect group, you know, and it just kind of magically happened, not through anything that I did actually, but I don't know. It was very fortunate.
Right. Well, and it sounds like you use the connections that you make along the way to help to amplify, you know, not just your own voice, but everyone else's around too. Mm-hmm. That seems like a tendency of, you know, a lot of living composers is to just say, you have this gift, you have this one, what can we do to put these together? Mm-hmm. Then it becomes something wonderful and, you know, larger than the singular efforts. So that's really great to hear that too. And especially championing, you know, newer voices, underserved voices, that's all, you know, super efforts there. So while talking about the title work, the multi-part title work, you've got, you know, a vocal ensemble, you've got trombone, percussion, piano on it. And as you've mentioned earlier on, you don't necessarily tie yourself to being like an environmental composer, but it does have those reminders to be present. And it features, I mean, a lot of the works on the album feature some poetry. Like you've got poetry of M. Bartley Siegel on there, also from the Keweenaw. And on this multi-part work, you have the poetry of Wendell Berry. So how did you stumble across the poetry of Wendell Berry, and how did that influence this title work?
So I have been a fan of Wendell Berry's work for a bagillion years. In fact, I had him read at both of my weddings. Can I say that?
Get somebody new next time, okay?
I have, in fact, on my desk right here is the Mad Farmer Liberation Front, which is one of my favorite Wendell Berry poems. So I've known his work forever, and I think he's about 94, 95 now. He's getting up there in age, but it was kind of a funny story because a couple, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I thought, oh, we really need to bring him here just to Michigan Tech. You know, he does some talks and stuff. And I was working on this piece of his. And I don't know if you know much about Wendell Berry, but he doesn't own a computer. So the only way to get in touch with Wendell Berry is, I'm not kidding, to write him a letter. So I wrote Wendell Berry a letter, and I asked him if he could come here. And then I also said, I have this music. And it wasn't, this is pre-recording. This is, I was just performing it. And I said, I just need to get your permission if I can use it. And he sent me back a letter, which I have in my house, and typed on a typewriter. You know, yes, you can use it. No, I'm not traveling anymore. I'm just getting too old to travel. So flash forward a couple of years, and I'm making the CD, and I decide I'm going to record the album. I get the grant and everything. And then I realize I haven't actually gotten the permission to use the music or the poetry. So that was kind of a panicked 30 seconds. But it was really great because I think it's Counterpoint Press, I think is his publisher. But anyway, they contacted them. And so there are some poets that are really, really very protective of their work and will not let people set it. So Mary Oliver made it very clear that none of her work was going to be set. Robert Frost, I think, just went public domain, like in the last, you probably know this, Scott, I think in the last couple of years, there were all these people trying to set his work and they couldn't. So I was a little worried because I wasn't sure where he was at with that. And so I contacted his publisher and I said, so I'd like to set some of his poems. He said, oh, which ones are they? Just send me what they are and I'll give you the permission. I was like, oh, okay, that was easy. So his music gets set quite a bit. And I think, and it is so, it's so funny. So Matt Siegel, who just gonna go, that was one of the hardest, that was the first choral work I'd ever written. And it was so hard to set. And it's not because the poetry isn't beautiful. It's just, it doesn't have that, it's just different. It was a much harder piece to set. The Wendell Berry music poems just kind of set themselves. They just seem to, and it's not a comment on the quality of the poetry. It was just, Matt's poetry is so, I don't know, Scott, you read it too. There's so much depth there that I had to like read it and memorize it and go through it. And it was kind of like just pulling teeth to get the music out of it. And I was really happy once I did it, but it was like I just run a marathon when I finished that piece, like, and Wendell Berry's was like a sprint, There's
a sort of a built-in lyricism to Berry, I think.
Yeah.
It just flows.
Sure.
As you said, I mean, if there's music in it, it sort of plays out and you enhance that beautifully.
Oh, thanks.
And
then it was,
there's text, I'm sure that's just a tougher nut to crack, and that's all the more rewarding once you get to that point where you can set it, I'm sure.
I was very happy to send that piece off to be performed. and I love the piece. And I was really fascinated by wine glasses, the wine glass instrument at the time. And actually a student of mine had written a piece with the wine glasses. And I went, oh, that's cool. Awesome. Yeah. And then I went, oh, it works so well with this poetry. And so that was kind of the glue that sort of found that poetry. And then it was interesting because the For Johnny B was actually an oral history. So that was just, I just took probably a 90-page oral history that someone had done of him and just culled like phrases in it that I thought were kind of musical sounding. So that's how like his name was Batista. They called him Bat. I was like, oh, it's 6-8-3-4. That's perfect. That's the piece.
Perfection.
This is one reason why it's so fun. That's a stupid word, but so fulfilling.
It's a great word.
And exciting to work with a living composer because of things like that. I mean, that's a nugget right there. We just got a little bit of insight into this wonderful composer's mind. There's so many moments like that that you just don't get with Beethoven or Mozart. Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, to be able to pick your brain and talk about something that just came out is just such a treat. And people someday will be able to look back and say, hey, that's how she did this. That's wonderful. Maybe that'll inspire me to do something similar. So that's wonderful that you can speak to that and speak about this album to what listens. Is there maybe one more particular work that you'd like to add some insight to? We've talked about, I think, just about all of them except for Cylindrical Whiskers.
Oh, yeah. So that's an interesting one. That was sort of like not the wild card in the album, but that was really cool. So I can't remember why I was writing a string quartet. I've never written a string quartet, and which is really strange because I'm a violinist and a violist, but I tend to write for people. And I always feel like string quartets are kind of tough to get into because they're always playing their Beethoven and their Haydn and their Mozart. And so there's so many string quartets out there. It's like white noise. Why bother? I mean, it makes more sense to me to write for percussion, saxophone, and violin because that's kind of an ensemble that, players are always looking. In fact, the Baroque dance is actually going to be played next year in Texas because someone contacted me because they were looking for something with that ensemble, so with string quartet. So anyways, I have the string quartet that I work with that I love. And I thought, oh, I should finally write a string quartet. I work with a colleague, and this was for a concert they were doing called Rock Music, that was music about rocks. And one of my colleagues, John Jasek, who I had written something a million years ago for him, had discovered this, I think it's a mineral. This is me not knowing much about geology. But it's a mineral called Marilaniite, which is named after this Marilani region in Africa, I believe. And it's this, it has absolutely no function other than it was just this new mineral that he found, and it has these little whiskers in it. And so I met with him, and it was really cool. I met with him, and I said, can we talk about this for a little bit? And we had coffee, and I got an hour and a half PowerPoint presentation on this, the whole story of finding this mineral. And he was so excited, like, and this guy's a physicist. So it was so funny, but it was so neat, like, to talk to someone who was so excited about like this thing that he did. And it ended up being like gem of the year in Mineral Magazine or something. I don't even know, but it was kind of a big deal.
Mineral Magazine, all right.
Or I don't even know. No, I mean, I should look up what it was. It was a big magazine about rocks. Yeah. And I'm totally not doing this justice because it was a big deal. But anyways, the word cylindrical whiskers kept popping out to me. And that was sort of like how he described this mineral. And I kind of went with that. So I sort of wanted to create this piece where these sort of little musical moments just kind of came out of the texture. So you'll hear it has a little bit of a minimal texture, but it's not when you really listen to it because it's constantly changing. Mm-hmm. And then just these little kind of whiskers sort of pop out. And that was sort of the impetus for the piece.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I wrote that for Thule String Quartet, which is Danny Samandel, who lives in Marquette, and then some other musicians in Ann Arbor and Chicago. And so that one was written, again, with that group in mind, which was really cool.
Right. And just a quick aside about composing that piece for the Rock Festival. Was that up in the Keweenaw as well? Like,
yeah.
Had to do with the Quincy Mine too?
Yes, and Scott was sort of there at that. So I organized, I think this is now the 5th year, I organized a contemporary music festival at Michigan Tech. And it started out as one concert, I think in 2017. And this year, I think it will be 10 concerts in 7 days in October.
Wow.
And one of the concerts, or we do 4 concerts at the Quincy Mine Hoist building that sell out. It's kind of crazy. It's this amazing thing. And people come in and they wear hard hats, and we have this crazy music in there, and it's really fun. So that rock music concert was sort of the beginning of those Quincy Mine concerts that we have kept going, and it's been really very cool.
It's awesome.
Remarkable because, I go around the country and I work with a lot of composers, and this is a great time for serious composition. It is a great time. People are writing music like Libby that is touching people, is connecting with people, is giving them a new view of art and music, and sometimes a different language. Back when I was a kid in the 80s, I did a lot of contemporary music, and the feeling was composers know better than the public. So the public are idiots, and we're going to tell you what music is. And if you don't show up, who cares? But now we find composers that are writing music that can communicate to the audience and are not sacrificing anything. In fact, to me, there's greater depth in this music today. And what Libby's done up there at the mine is remarkable. I feel so fortunate that I was there to experience it. It's magical. And you put on your hard hat and you listen in this cathedral of the Industrial Revolution, basically, and listen to those sounds. And as she said, this was some pretty hardcore music. This was not just background music. This is serious composition, and it was moving people. It was creating an amazing experience. So the fact that this is growing is a testament to her, but also a testament to where we are in the world and people's desire for art, for connection.
Yeah, it's nice that the audience is becoming relevant again. Because I was in grad school in the 90s anyways, and it was a weird time to be in grad school because it was sort of that you know, if you wrote anything in G major, your music was horrible. And, you know, it's funny, my music has not changed I mean, it's, you know, evolved, but it's not, I don't think my ethos has changed at all. I think everything around me has changed. So I get many more performances now than I ever did before. And I think it's just because I think, my music, you know, it's funny, it was like old fashioned for a while and now it's not. And it's kind of one of those things like, the kids are playing it. I was telling Scott, I had a student play at a recital in Ann Arbor a couple of weeks ago and they played barefoot. It was really cool. I was watching the video, it was the Melusina piece, but I think at one time it might've been thought to be a little bit too tonal or too accessible. And I think it's kind of come full circle, which is kind of refreshing, I think.
It's so expressive. I teach a course in period performance practice down here at the University of Miami, and next semester in the fall will be the contemporary music segment. And I'm planning on playing Melusina for my class. Probably about 30 minutes. Maybe live stream and you can tell me how badly.
Yeah, let me know. I'll come in and I'll jump in.
Part of the reason for the class is to get students used to trying to understand a different musical language, and you put your own ego by the side and you try to get inside the composer's head and work with the composer and talk with them, and then bring yourself to the process. And this piece lends itself totally well. I think Libby can probably talk about this recent performance being very different, and that is a great thing. Oh my God. Can you imagine if everybody played Mozart the same way? Gosh, sorry, boring. And to have a piece like this with a composer who has the confidence to allow performers that personal connection, I think is very exciting. But you mentioned it was a very different performance, right, Libby?
Yeah, and I mean, I was telling Scott, so the piece has been played I don't know how many times, and every violinist has done it a little differently, and I actually kind of add to the score as I have it, like it's kind of like a big giant game of telephone, you know, like someone plays it and then someone else plays it, and in fact, it was funny because
that's your next solo violin piece called Telephone. Okay,
it's called Telephone. Yeah, I mean that is, but I mean I love that idea of like every violinist who's played it has kind of like put their mark on it, and in fact, when we did it in Boston, we decided to mute the last. It was the last, I don't know, the end of it, we decided to mute it, and I had never done, and it was this epiphany I had. I went, oh, that just makes so much sense to mute the last 6 measures. And so that's now in the score. So it's, and a lot of my music is like that. So, you know, when Baroque dances is a percussion, and it's, the percussion part, I will admit is insane. And it probably should have been for 2 percussionists. Which the percussionist Mike Williams, who was one of the kindest humans on the planet, was very diplomatic in telling me what was wrong with my part. But it was really fun to work with him because he gave me lots of pointers on how to do it. So I'm not the kind of composer where like the ink is dry. I mean, not that there's any ink anymore, and then it's done, right? Like it's the pieces are kind of never done. They're always sort of. Every time that I perform something, I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. I'll add that to it.
Right, and that speaks to how it's, you know, still a living piece. It's not something that needs to be stamped and says this is how it is forevermore. So that you know, the collaborative process is very important. It sounds.
For sure.
That's wonderful to hear that too, and you know, just hearing all these stories that come from the making of this album are a joy. And I thank you both so much for speaking with us today. Again, just a reminder, we're talking with composer Libby Meyer about her album, To What Listens, and we have one of the performers, Scott Flavin, who's joined us as well. As we wrap up, just wanted to congratulate both of you for your new posts with the Pine Mountain Music Festival. Could we just briefly discuss that real quick? Libby, do you want to mention what you're doing with Pine Mountain?
So we have these titles that are meaningless. So, Danny Samandel and I are the co-executive directors, and I guess we're calling Scott the artistic director, but I think correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, but I think we're thinking of ourselves as sort of like the executive team. So we sort of have these, lateral positions. We're the power trio. And Scott could pick this, but it was just through like lots of conversation last summer. You know, Pine Mountain is such a wonderful festival with such a wonderful history. And financially, this is not a secret, it had fallen on some hard times. I mean, since the crash of 2008, and there was some challenges with the festival, and this was like every single nonprofit in the country, right? So there was the 2008, and then there was COVID. I mean, it was like the perfect storm, right? And so we had lots of conversations about like, what can we do to like really, take this wonderful festival and really see if we can kind of sort of get past, these difficult times that we've been going through. And so we all just met and got really excited about the possibilities of, I don't know, it was just the possibilities of like what we could do with this festival. And I love the fact that it's a true UP festival and really trying to highlight, Upper Peninsula musicians and composers and, or honorary Upper Peninsula musicians like Scott.
I like to consider myself an honorary Uper.
There are quite a few honorary Uper titles around there,
Yeah.
so there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I'd like to add just quickly is just that, so as Libby said, we're committed to being fiscally responsible. And, again, as musicians and people involved in the arts for a lot of years, we know we can make, and we are making a festival that we can afford, that has the highest artistic level. So we're sort of entitling this season Stories in Music. And one of the things that we're most proud of is bringing back children's concerts, which we haven't done for a couple of years. And we're working with Trish
Helsel. Yeah.
Wonderful puppeteer who's doing workshops, and then my trio, the Bergonzi Trio, is going to play. So kids in the Keweenaw and the UP are going to be building puppets and going to be performing with the Bergonzi Trio works of Shostakovich and Dvorak, maybe even Beethoven and Brahms. So that's really, really exciting. Then our trio has our own concerts. And then we also have what we've had for the past few years, several years, upstarts, which are the young pre-professional musicians of the UP. And they're just remarkable performers. Susie Buchanan does a wonderful job with that, playing and coordinating, and we're helping out with that as well. So it's a really exciting season, and we haven't sacrificed the number of events or anything. And we're, Libby and Danny are working their tails off, and the board is very, very supportive. And it's very exciting because there's a feeling of positivity and growth that, as we move forward in subsequent years, you're going to see a lot of very, very exciting events.
Yeah, and we've been really fortunate to have some wonderful community partners. The Rosé Center has been really wonderful. They're giving us free rehearsal space, and it's such a well-loved festival. I mean, I was just amazed at how many people just have these great stories about the festival, or their first experience with classical music was at the festival, and I feel like there's this. When you say classical music to people, or that term, there's this baggage that tends to go along with what classical music is and who likes classical music. And I think one of the things that we've really, as a team, kind of thought about is we really want to broaden the scope of who the Pine Mountain audience is, and not have anyone feel like, oh, this isn't for me because it's for them. And one of the things which we're kind of trialing this year is we're doing a pay what you can model for at least the concert in Houghton. Just to kind of see, because I know that it's been hard for people, and ticket prices are not cheap, and especially if you're a family of four and or you've got to get a babysitter or whatever. And so we're trying this, and hopefully we'll be able to do this in future years with a real no questions asked. Like, if you can afford $5 for a ticket, you can afford $5 a ticket, and that's okay, and you can go. So and a lot of our concerts are free. So the Upstarts concert is free. And in fact, as part of the Upstarts concert, we're having an instrument petting zoo. We're really trying to really focus on like the next audience, the future, classical music audience.
Yeah.
And so, attracting kids to playing stringed instruments and coming to these concerts. And I love the idea of the children's concerts, and they'll be making puppets and then doing puppetry during the concert. And so this sort of interactive experience for children to have with this classical music, so that they come away, people don't people don't always remember maybe exactly what the concert was, but they remember how they felt, you know, and they remember what the experience was like. And if they had a good experience, they're going to go again. And they might even be willing to go again to something that they haven't heard before, you know, just because, oh, I did this and it was a good experience, so I'm going to do this again. And so if we can get people in the door and take away as many barriers as possible, you know, for them to come to these concerts, I think that's a win for us. So.
Yep. Yeah, that's a preach moment right there for sure. Just
Sorry.
removing those barriers.
I got my soapbox out.
Yeah, no, absolutely hard to agree about that. You know, it's great to have performances available for people and make them accessible, and at the same time help them understand that they're welcome there and that they can come back and have those positive experiences and then become explorers of music that way too.
Mm-hmm.
If they say I'm going to try something that I haven't heard before. So
yep.
It sounds like the festival is in good hands with the trio, 2 members of the trio here right now. So, well, I want to thank you both so much for spending some time with me today to talk about the album, to talk about your music, your performances, to talk about Pine Mountain. So any last words that you'd like to leave us with? Start with you, Libby.
Thanks for listening. This is really great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Scott, anything you want to leave our...
I just second what Libby says. Thanks for listening. I love that. I think that's and thank you for listening, Kurt. I mean, you know, this and talking about this is something of which the UP should be proud. Our country should be proud, seriously, to have a composer like this and someone giving such great art to us. So go out and get this, download it, buy this
download it. Yes. Oh, and I have to put in a plug real quick. Steve Grimm, who's a wonderful photographer in Copper Harbor, did all of the cover photography.
Wow.
So yeah, so
gorgeous.
that is that's one of Steve's. He just does beautiful work.
The double fold there.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. I just fell in love with that.
The tree inside as well. So all right. Well, hey, it's been a pleasure. Thank you both so much for taking some time today.
Likewise.
Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, Scott.